Emma deleted the email without reading it. Another automated rejection from another faceless company, another algorithm that had weighed her resume and found it lacking. She minimized her inbox and stared at the spreadsheet on her screen. Someone else's data, someone else's project, someone else's name on the final report. 3 years as a contract data analyst for a firm that refused to convert her to full-time, and she was still building dashboards she'd never be credited for. Her phone buzzed. A text from Megan. "Drinks tonight? The whole group is going." The whole group. Emma knew what that meant. Megan and Rob, joined at the hip and performing their relationship like a stage play. Danielle, who collected friends the way some people collected handbags, for display, not for use. And Kyle, who only ever texted Emma when he needed someone to complain to at 2 a.m, but never once asked how she was doing. "Can't tonight," Emma typed back. Busy. She wasn't busy. She was sitting in a studio apartment in Arlington, Virginia, eating cold pad thai from a container and watching the ceiling fan make its slow, arthritic rotations. The apartment was clean, sparse, and joyless, a waiting room for a life that never arrived. 3 years since David. 3 years since he'd sat across from her at a brunch spot in DuPont Circle and told her she was too intense and too hard to reach in the same breath, as if those weren't contradictions. 3 years of first dates that went nowhere, of apps she deleted and re-downloaded like a nervous habit, of watching everyone around her pair off while she remained stubbornly, involuntarily alone. She wasn't ugly. She wasn't cruel. She was just difficult to know. She lived behind her data, behind her spreadsheets, behind the clean logic of numbers that never lied and never left. People, she had learned, did both with alarming frequency. The hiking trip to Ireland wasn't a vacation. It was an evacuation. She had cashed in her meager PTO, maxed out a credit card she'd regret later, and booked a one-way flight to Shannon with a vague return date. Her mother had called it reckless. Megan had called it dramatic. Emma called it the first honest decision she'd made in years. She needed to be somewhere where nobody knew her, where nobody expected her to perform the exhausting pantomime of being fine. She needed mud and rain and silence. She needed to walk until her legs screamed louder than her mind. The first days delivered exactly what she'd paid for. Sun-dappled glens that unrolled like bolts of green velvet. Mist-shrouded peaks that dissolved into cloud and reappeared like slow magic. The sharp, mineral scent of petrichor after a sudden rain. Her boots crunched on gravel and sank into peat, and the rhythm of walking unknotted something in her chest that had been cinched tight for longer than she could name. She spoke to no one. She ate in small village pubs, where the barkeep nodded and poured without prying. She slept in hostels and lean-tos, and once, wrapped in her bivvy under a cathedral of stars so dense it looked like spilled sugar on black glass. On the 4th morning, on a remote and fog-choked trail near the Ring of Kerry, she met him. He appeared as a silhouette against a sudden burst of sunlight that split the clouds like a curtain being drawn. A fellow hiker, or so she assumed. He was lean, angular, with a stillness about him that made the air feel heavier. His gear was simple and weather-worn, a canvas pack and a wool jacket that didn't match the pattern of any current brand she recognized. But his eyes, she noticed them immediately, the way you notice a deep well when you lean over the edge. They were green, not the bright green of contact lenses or television actors, but the cool, ancient green of the bog she'd crossed. Old water, still water, water that remembered. "You're a long way from anywhere," he said. "That's the point," Emma replied. He smiled, not a grin, not a smirk. A slow, real thing, like sunrise. "Then we're walking the same direction." He introduced himself only as Finn. They hiked together that day, and the next, and the next. Emma couldn't explain why she let him. She was a woman hiking alone in a foreign country, and every safety instinct she possessed should have sent her the other direction. But Finn didn't crowd her. He didn't flirt or perform. He walked beside her in a comfortable, breathing silence, and when he spoke, it was about the land. Not the way a tour guide speaks, rehearsed, polished, anecdotal. Finn spoke about the hills the way you speak about someone you love. He told her about a kingdom that lived within the hollow hills, older than memory. About battles fought in the twilight between what is seen and what is felt. About a people who existed in the cracks of reality, not behind it or beneath it, but threaded through it, the way veins thread through stone. "You're telling me fairy tales," Emma said on the second evening, sitting on a flat rock while Finn coaxed a small fire from damp kindling with an ease that bordered on suspicious. "I'm telling you history," he said. "Your people write it down. Mine remember it. My people." He looked at her across the fire. The flames caught those green eyes and did something strange to them, deepened them, made them flicker with a light that didn't quite match the source. "You carry a great heaviness, Emma. I can see it. You've been carrying it a long while." She should have deflected. She should have changed the subject or made a joke. Instead, she heard herself say, "Sometimes I think I've been carrying it my whole life." And then she was talking. Really talking. The way she hadn't talked to anyone in years. Not to Megan, not to her therapist, not even to herself in the darkest hours. She told him about the job that treated her like furniture, about the friends who only wanted the curated version of her, about David, about the loneliness that had followed, about the feeling of standing in a crowded room and being fundamentally invisible, about her father, who had died when she was 12, and left behind a silence so vast she'd been trying to fill it with data and logic ever since, as if she could analyze her way out of grief. Finn listened. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't say, "You should try," or "Have you considered?" or any of the other phrases that well-meaning people use to fill the space where empathy should be. He just listened, his green eyes steady, his hands still. When she finished hollow and raw, he said quietly, "Among my people there is a word, Anamkara. It means friend of the soul. It is believed that two souls can recognize each other across any distance, any barrier, any amount of time. Not because they are the same, but because they are answers to each other's questions." Emma's eyes burned. "That's a beautiful idea." "It isn't an idea," Finn said. "It's a fact. Rarer than your people imagine, but not rare enough to be fiction." She didn't kiss him that night. She didn't need to. Something had already passed between them that was more intimate than touch. A mutual confession that the world each of them inhabited was in some essential way incomplete. On the third afternoon, Finn guided her off the trail. "I want to show you something," he said, and his voice had shifted. Lighter, almost nervous. It was the first time she'd seen anything resembling uncertainty in him, and it made him more real, more reachable. They pushed through a wall of ancient gorse and emerged into a hidden glen that wasn't on her map, wasn't on any map. It was a bowl of green silence, sheltered on all sides by hills so steep they felt like cupped hands. In its center stood a single towering hawthorn tree, its branches heavy with gnarled ancient life. White blossoms clung to every limb despite the season, and the air around it smelled of honey and rain and something older, something mineral and electric, like the air before lightning. "What is this place?" Emma whispered. "A thin place," Finn said. "A spot where the breath of my world touches yours." He turned to her, and his expression was open and unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. "I brought you here because I think you already know the truth, Emma. You've known it since we met. You just haven't let yourself believe it." "The truth about what?" "About me. About what I am." She looked at him, really looked, and for a moment, the analytical architecture of her mind tried to assert itself, tried to build a rational framework around the impossible thing she was seeing. The way the light bent around him, the way the hawthorn blossoms turned toward him like small faces, the way he hadn't aged, hadn't tired, hadn't sweated in 3 days of hard hiking. "You're not human," she said. "Not a question." "No." That slow sunrise smile. "But I am real. Show me. Close your eyes." She did, and he placed his cool hand over hers. And in the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw it. Not with her eyes, but with something deeper. Something she didn't have a name for. A world laid over this one like a transparency on a projector. Bioluminescent forests. Rivers that ran with light instead of water. Architecture grown from living wood, spiraling upward into a sky that held two pale, enormous moons. She opened her eyes. Finn was watching her, and in his expression, she saw something she recognized because she'd felt it herself for 3 long, lonely years. The fear that comes with wanting someone to stay. "You're afraid I'll run," she said. "You'd have every reason to." "I've been running my whole life, Finn. From grief, from people, from anything that asks me to feel something I can't control." She squeezed his hand. "I'm so tired of running." He kissed her then, or she kissed him. It didn't matter. The way it doesn't matter which instrument begins a duet. It was gentle and electric, and tasted like rain. And somewhere in the branches above them, the hawthorn blossoms shivered as if caught in a wind that touched nothing else. "Come with me," Finn said. "Just for a moment, just to see." Emma looked at the hawthorn. Its trunk had split open, not violently, but gently, the way a door opens for someone expected. Inside, the bark glowed with a faint green-gold light. "How long?" she asked. "A breath, a heartbeat. I'll bring you right back." She took his hand and stepped through. The world on the other side was everything she had seen behind her eyelids, and more. The forest was vast, ancient beyond comprehension, its trees twisted into shapes that were equal parts sculpture and organism. Moss glowed in soft blues and purples along every surface. The air was warm and sweet and impossibly clean, as if pollution were a concept that had never been invented. Finn's people were tall, slender, luminous. They moved through the forest with an unhurried grace, and they greeted Finn with nods and murmured words in a language that sounded like water over stone. They looked at Emma with curiosity, but not hostility. An elder with silver hair that fell past her waist pressed a warm hand to Emma's cheek and said something that made Finn laugh. "What did she say?" Emma asked. "She said your soul is very loud." He grinned. "It's a compliment." They walked through groves of trees that sang, actually sang, a low harmonic hum that resonated in Emma's ribs. They stood at the edge of a waterfall that flowed upward, its mist catching bioluminescent light and scattering it into prismatic halos. They ate fruit that tasted like nothing she could name, sweet and complex and faintly electric on her tongue. And they talked. For what felt like hours or days, they talked. Emma told Finn about spreadsheets and traffic jams, and the particular loneliness of eating lunch alone at your desk. Finn told Emma about the wars his people had fought with shadow creatures that crept in from the edges of their world, about the art of growing a house from a single seed, about the grief of watching human centuries pass like seasons, while the people he'd grown fond of aged and vanished. "Is that why you were on that trail?" Emma asked. "Were you looking for someone?" Finn was quiet for a long time. "I was looking for you," he said. "Not you specifically, but someone like you. Someone whose soul was loud enough to hear." She leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Emma felt the absence of loneliness. Not as the presence of another person, but as the presence of understanding. Finn saw her. Not the curated version, not the performance. The real, difficult, too intense, hard to reach her. And he hadn't flinched. When they finally stepped back through the hawthorn, the glen looked the same. The sky was the same grey. The air was the same cool damp. But Emma's smartwatch, which had frozen the moment she'd entered the tree, was now cycling through error messages, its display glitching wildly. It finally settled on a date. Emma stared at it, restarted it, stared again. "Finn," she said, her voice thin and strange. "How long were we gone?" He didn't answer immediately. He sat down on the moss beside the hawthorn and pulled her gently down beside him. His face was careful, measured, the face of someone about to deliver news they've been dreading. Time moves differently between our worlds, Emma. It always has. A day among my people is not a day among yours. How long, Finn? What felt like a short while to you and me? In your world, 100 years have passed. The number landed like a stone in still water. She felt the ripples move through her. Denial, then vertigo, then a cold, spreading understanding. Her mother, Megan. The apartment in Arlington. The job she hated. The city she knew. The entire infrastructure of her miserable, beautiful, irreplaceable human life. All of it was a century gone. No, she whispered. No, that's not. You said a breath. You said a heartbeat. And I meant it. Among my people, it was a heartbeat. I didn't deceive you, Emma. I would never. His voice cracked on the last word, and she saw that his pain was genuine. The pain of someone who had done an unforgivable thing with the best of intentions. I thought I could bring you back before the gap grew too wide. I was wrong. I have lived long enough to know many things, but I have never been able to master the current between our worlds. I'm sorry. I am so deeply sorry. Emma stood. She walked to the edge of the glen and looked out at the hills. They were the same hills, the same ancient, indifferent stone. But beyond them, she knew, everything had changed. I need to see, she said. She saw. The nearest town was unrecognizable, sleek, quiet, its buildings grown from materials she couldn't identify. Vehicles moved without sound. People spoke to devices embedded in their skin. The air was cleaner, the sky was bluer, and none of it was hers. She found a public terminal, a glowing, intuitive interface that responded to her touch, and searched for herself. For her mother. For Megan. For David. For anyone. They were all gone. Every name she entered returned the same result. A date of birth, a date of death. A digital memorial page with photos she recognized and photos she didn't. Her mother had lived to 87. Megan had married Rob. David had moved to Portland and had 2 daughters. They had lived. They had continued. They had died. And Emma had been standing in a glowing forest, eating impossible fruit, falling in love. The guilt was annihilating. She sat on a bench in a park that might have been the National Mall. The bones of it were there, the long green stretch, the monuments, though they'd been joined by new ones she didn't recognize, and she wept until her ribs ached. Finn sat beside her. He didn't touch her. He waited. You stole my life, she said. I know. Everyone I've ever known is dead. Yes. And you sat there in your beautiful forest, and you let me fall in love with you while my mother was dying. Finn closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were bright with a grief that mirrored hers. Your mother died peacefully, Emma, in her sleep. She was surrounded by people who loved her. I checked. After I realized what had happened, I checked. It was the least I could do, and it was not enough. You checked. A raw, bitter laugh. How thoughtful. They sat in silence for a long time. The future hummed around them, indifferent to her heartbreak. For 2 years, Emma tried. She tried to build a life in this new century. Her skills were obsolete. Data analysis had been fully automated decades ago. But there were retraining programs, charitable foundations for what they politely called temporal displacement cases. She was not, it turned out, the first person Finn's people had accidentally misplaced in time. She learned new systems. She took a small apartment in a city that used to be Baltimore. She attended support groups with other displaced people, most of whom had far more dramatic stories than hers. But the world didn't fit. It was like wearing someone else's shoes. Functional, technically correct, but wrong in every subtle, maddening way. The food was engineered for optimal nutrition and tasted like a memory of flavor. The social networks were seamless, frictionless, and profoundly empty. People were kind, but their kindness had the polished, algorithmic quality of a system designed to minimize conflict. Nobody argued. Nobody was messy. Nobody was real in the way that she understood realness. Raw, flawed, difficult. She missed dirt. She missed cold rain on her face. She missed the unpredictable cruelty and beauty of a world that hadn't been optimized. She missed Finn. He visited her sometimes. He would appear on her doorstep, still wearing that ancient wool jacket, looking exactly as he had on the trail, unchanged, unaged, carrying a sorrow so heavy it bent the air around him. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said once, standing in her doorway, the future's clean light falling on his inhuman face. "Good," she said, "because I haven't." But she let him in. Every time she let him in, because even her fury at him was more real, more alive than anything else in this polished, optimized century. And because, beneath the fury, the thing that had grown between them under the hawthorn tree was still there, stubborn, inexplicable, and completely uninterested in her rational objections. On a grey morning 2 years into her displacement, Emma woke to a sharp pain in her chest. Not emotional, physical. A pressure, a wrongness, like a clock whose mainspring had wound past its limit. She went to a medical facility. The doctor, if that's what they were called now, ran diagnostics that were silent and instantaneous. "Your cellular structure is degrading," the doctor said, frowning at data that floated in the air between them. "It's consistent with what we see in other temporal displacement cases. Your biology is anchored to your original time. The further you are from it, the more strain your cells endure." "What does that mean?" The doctor hesitated. "It means your body is aging at an accelerated rate. Not visibly, not yet. But internally, your organs are under enormous stress. If you remain in this time..." Another hesitation. "I'd estimate a matter of days, perhaps a week." Emma stared at the floating data. Numbers. She'd spent her whole life trusting numbers. "Is there a treatment?" "Nothing in our current medicine. The displacement is temporal, not biological. We can't reverse it. I'm sorry." She called for Finn. She didn't know how. She simply stood on the roof of her apartment building, looked out at the skyline of a city she'd never belonged to, and said his name. He was there within the hour. She told him what the doctor had said. Finn listened without interruption, his ancient face utterly still. When she finished, he sat beside her on the rooftop ledge and looked out at the same skyline. "There is another option," he said quietly. "But I need you to understand it completely before I offer it. Tell me. If you return to my world, truly return, not as a visitor, but as a resident, the decay stops. More than stops. My world's energy would bind to your cells the way sunlight binds to a leaf. You would be sustained by it, kept whole by it." He paused. "You would live for 1,000 years, Emma. You would not age. You would not sicken. You would walk among my people as one of us, for as long as the forest stands." The number was so absurd it almost made her laugh. 1,000 years. She was 31. She'd been struggling to get through a single Tuesday. "And if I don't?" Finn's jaw tightened. "Then these are your last days, and I will spend every one of them beside you if you'll let me. I will not leave you to face this alone. 1,000 years with you, or a few days without you. No." His voice was fierce, sudden. "Not with me. Not as a condition. If you come to my world, you come for yourself. Because you choose life. Because you want to live. I will be there, yes, and I will love you for every one of those years if you'll have me. But I will not be your reason. That has to be yours." She looked at him. This impossible creature who had wrecked her life and saved it in the same gesture. Who had listened to her rage and never defended himself. Who had visited her in her cramped future apartment and brought her wildflowers that smelled like rain, and never once asked for anything in return. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you love me? I'm ordinary. I'm difficult. I'm a data analyst from Virginia who can't keep a relationship and eats cold takeout alone." Finn took her face in his cool hands. "You are the loudest soul I have ever heard. In 3,000 years of walking between worlds, I have never met anyone who feels as fiercely as you. You are not ordinary, Emma. You are not difficult. You are a fire in a world that has forgotten what warmth feels like. And I am not asking you to be easy. I am asking you to be exactly what you are. Emma stood at the hawthorn stump, her hand on the ancient wood. The future city glowed behind her. The wind carried the scent of recycled air and synthetic jasmine. She closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, who had lived to 87 and died in her sleep. About Megan, who had married Rob and presumably been very happy posting about it. About David, who had moved to Portland and raised 2 daughters, who would never know that a woman named Emma had once loved their father over brunch in Dupont Circle. She thought about the support group, about the other displaced people who sat in a circle and shared their grief like a collection plate, about the doctor's floating data, about the cold pad thai and the ceiling fan and the emails she had deleted without reading. She thought about Finn's world, the singing trees, the upward waterfall, the elder who said her soul was loud. She opened her eyes. Finn stood before her, his hand extended. Behind him, the stump had split open again, breathing that green-gold light. "I have one condition," Emma said. "Name it." "I'm not going to be some fragile human you rescued. I'm not going to be the mortal pet of the Fairy King. If I come with you, I come as an equal. I learn your language. I learn your world. I do something that matters." Finn's smile was slow and wide, and full of a light that had nothing to do with bioluminescence. "Among my people, we have a name for someone who walks between worlds, who carries the memory of one life into another. We call them Shanaki, the keeper of stories. You want me to be a storyteller? I want you to be the bridge. My people are ancient, Emma. We remember everything, and because of that, we understand very little. We need someone who knows what it is to forget, what it is to lose, what it is to be mortal and afraid and still choose to love." Emma looked at the light pouring from the hawthorn stump. She looked at the future behind her, clean, bright, and empty as a new spreadsheet. She took his hand. Epilogue, 462 years later. The girl arrived on a Tuesday. They found her wandering the silver meadow near the eastern border, shivering and wide-eyed, clutching a device she called a phone, though it bore no resemblance to anything Emma remembered by that name. Emma was in the archive when word reached her, a vast, living library grown into the trunk of a tree, so large its canopy formed its own weather system. At 493 years old, Emma still moved with the brisk, purposeful energy of a woman who had once walked across Ireland in hiking boots, though her eyes held a depth, now that made even the eldest of Finn's people fall quiet in her presence. She found the girl sitting on a moss-covered stone, crying so hard her body shook. Emma sat beside her. She didn't speak. She didn't offer solutions. She waited. When the girl finally looked up, her face was blotchy and terrified and young, so unbearably young. "Where am I?" she whispered. "What happened? I was on a hike and there was this tree and—" "I know," Emma said. And she took the girl's trembling hand and she held it, and she said the thing that no one in any century had ever said to Emma in the moment she needed it most. "I believe you, and you're not alone." Behind them, unseen, Finn leaned against a luminous oak and watched his wife do the thing she had been born to do. Not analyze, not optimize, not perform. Simply be there, in the raw, unpolished, deeply human way that his ancient people had never quite mastered. The girl looked up at Emma with desperate, searching eyes. "Can I go home?" Emma was quiet for a moment. 462 years of memories moved behind her face. Her mother's kitchen, the smell of boxed mac and cheese, the sound of beltway traffic, the weight of a century of graves. The answer was complicated. The answer was a story. "Let me tell you what happened to me," Emma said, "and then we'll figure it out together." The hawthorn blossoms shivered. The forest hummed its low, eternal chord. And somewhere in the space between worlds, a door stood open, patient as always, waiting to see what she would choose.